Welcome back. If you found this series, chances are you've already tried to do the right thing, and instead, you've been treated like the problem. You've asked for help and been ignored. You've tried to explain and been made to feel unstable. You followed the rules and somehow still lost everything that matters. I've been there, and what I realised after years of being passed from pillar to post, blamed at other people's decisions, and punished for caring. The system isn't broken. It was built this way, and it wasn't built for someone like you to win.
So let's break this down. You go to housing because your contacts are either jeopardised or stopped, or you've been told that you're living in insufficient housing. But they say you're not the primary caregiver. You go to family court, and the judge says that the kids have the right to see both parents, but it has to be in their best interests. So until you sort your housing, you can only have from Friday to Sunday. So you're blocked then as well. So you go to universal credit. Now, I didn't clarify in my last video that I don't even want the child's element. This is purely about the housing elements because they're not supposed to charge bedroom tax for the room that is legally not spare, as my children actually do live with me and they live with their mother. So you're told three things that are all correct in their own silos, but completely incompatible with each other when you're just trying to be a parent. And they also seem, in some cases, such as housing allocation, to fall outside the law. If anyone could call me out on this one, then really that's help even. But basically, that's not a glitch. That's design. The maze is the mechanism.
In family court, a judge won't grant 50-50 shared care unless you already have housing in place. But there's a catch. You can't get the housing without the court order, so you're stuck being told to meet a standard you're not being supposed to achieve. This gets worse when Kafka enters the picture. They're the gatekeepers. They write the report that the judge will rely on more than anything. But Kafkas don't deal in future potential. So an example, like previously before I asked for help, as I've mentioned, I was a joiner. Something happened where when I was stopped from seeing my kids, I took that as an attempt to break me. And someone out there was stupid enough to think it was going to be my sons that I gave up on. Back to this. So they only assess what exists right now, which prolongs things. Current accommodation, current schools access, current routine. If you're in the process of improving things and you haven't managed it yet, it gets ignored. And here's the kicker: legal teams, even experienced ones, often don't understand these Kafkas reports to the same extent that a trained social worker would. They treat it like it's an academic paper, not a safeguarding document. At one point in my own case, I said, you expect a care leaver to view you as social workers, but you can't hold a conversation about social policy with even me, a layperson with no formal training, just lived experience. That silence told me everything I needed to know about their preparedness. The emotional and strategic abuse cycle used in systems like this often follows a very familiar sequence. Gaslighting is when they make you question your memory, logic, emotional response, and experience. Feigning ignorance is when they pretend that basic policy contradictions are news to them, or that the things that you're saying to them in terms of the obstacles you're facing are never before heard of, when in fact it's pretty much every family this ends up happening to once they hit this hamster wheel. Blame shifting is when they imply that your difficulties and the things you're asking for support with are caused by you. You heard that right. What's the point in their jobs if you're not allowed to ask them? And they'll claim that it's got nothing to do with the system or its contradictions or the constant, which leads to constant complaints they get. In my case, eventually, once that wasn't working, they moved it on to wheedling, where professionals use flattery, soft tones, feigned empathy to steer you into dropping your guard, only to shift the narrative or discredit you once you do. So I've had this a few times when I've been across the table with professionals while they're asking me all sorts of questions. Like they'll ask me questions about ADHD, autism, because I'm diagnosed with ADHD and my son's diagnosed autistic. So they're basically geared at asking how well do I understand how to look after them. And okay, but when I've been able to answer that, they've accused me of rabbit holing, and I've ended up pulling them on that a few times, basically because the things I'm saying are answers to questions that professionals have asked me. So this is their questions, and unless I'm being treated differently, that would kind of imply that they expect a teenage pregnancy to know this before they've even had their baby. Another habit I've found is that professionals will misrepresent neurodiversity as mental illness or signs of mental illness, and that would then be weaponized against. It's been weaponized against me before, and the longer you stay in this fight, the greater the threat becomes. So, moving on to intimidation. As I mentioned, the longer you stay in this fight, the higher the threat level reaches. Non molestation orders are the new routine. Initially, these were used as protection, but nowadays they're used more like an intimidation tactic. A father gets too close to solving his case and suddenly he's a risk. So if he can't call you a deadbeat, they'll call you dangerous instead. Conversely, non-molestation orders are now actively advised to mothers. And I mentioned in my previous video that I would make a video in defense of mothers who are cornered into that. basically the way that's done in some cases is the mother will be told that she'll receive no support unless she applies for one. No more support with the situation. She just gets told she's left arguing with you while getting given none of the info. Now, personally, I think that constitutes institutional coercive control, where you intimidate or force someone into a position that they're not necessarily comfortable with and doesn't necessarily line up with their values. And in with this, it's not about safety, it's about compliance. If you don't play the role the system expects, you lose support. Now, the legal threshold for a non molestation order is meant to be fear of harm, not convenience. When mothers are pressured to file them, not because they're unsafe, but because it's the only way to access legal aid or if they need access to housing, then that creates a situation where the state is using fear as a gatekeeper mechanism. The accused parent then becomes collateral and the child becomes a pawn. Once that order is in place, it becomes quite difficult. You're on quite a tightrope. And this is normally the stage where a lot of dads or sometimes mums will leg it because they're scared. And once that happens, your children are then manipulated into thinking you're left because they don't matter, you've abandoned them, they weren't worth fighting for, you're just a deadbeat. That's what the narrative plays out. But we know the legal threshold for manipulation is to be dishonest for personal gain. So, what did they gain here? Preserving what they think they're saving. A flawed status quo, while actually causing tremendous cost in duplicate social services work, such as interventions that go nowhere, the complaints processes that costs money. Repeat court appearances also cost a lot of money, especially when it's not addressed the first time and you've got to go a few times when you're at a few different stages. The mental exhaustion of every time you get a no, you go outside, you look at a couple of lampposts and you go, what am I going to do now? And then you sit and figure that out. And the career's lost. As I mentioned, before I asked for help, I was a joiner. But how am I supposed to, how was I supposed to continue to run a joinery firm while having to argue full time to professionals who should have known better when I was working the same hours as them? This happens quite often as well with professionals having to leave the careers. I've known it to happen to teachers even. And probably the saddest part about this is the lives lost when it feels like there's just no point going on and you are kind of steered into that. But you're mourning your former life, you're trying to work out as much of it as you can and trying to be a good dad to your children. And nothing's ever good enough. You're always put down, you're always accused of lying, controlling, blah de blah. And many people do take their lives through this. It's a major cause. But then look at the impact that has on other members of the family, the children themselves, the increased mental health costs. With children who are left with trauma, no one explains, which they'll ask valid questions which you are not legally allowed to answer. Things that they're saying that you can't answer because of the anti-denigration order inherent in every court order. So a lot of time when at this point, I say if the parents does as he's told and gives up and ends up turning to drugs to numb a level of pain that I am not cruel enough to describe. Drugs often leading to crime. We've got to pretend that we don't know why these things happen to. And then the children grow up with complex trauma, thinking that someone they loved abandoned them and that they weren't good enough for someone they loved. And we're not allowed to answer for ourselves. They end up turning to drugs, crime, joining in to push the wheel to keep it turning, the same wheel that destroyed the parents. And at this point, the system just seems to pat itself on the back and thank itself for the order it maintains. But if you've reached that point where you feel like ending it, don't. If you feel like life is not worth living, you're wrong. You're just going through a crap time in your life. As long as you've got breath left in your body, you have a chance to fight this. Once you're dead, you can't. Once you're dead, you can't change anything. If you stay alive, become a fact of the universe, something unchanging, something that just keeps moving forward. Do not let them take you away from your children, be it through intimidation or your death. Although I can understand why people do that, I really honestly can. Are these idiots worth it? Or is the fact that you're alive worth more to your children than that professional's degree? Keep going. Don't give up. And don't become a statistic. So, for years, I thought I just wasn't explaining that properly. But eventually, I stopped trying to be understood and I started collecting proof. I recorded every contradiction, and they said, you know, when I've gone for when I've uploaded me court order with consent, for example, because I didn't want the child's elements, usually are saying, well, only the primary caregiver can have housing, which is against the law. When they denied housing support, and when they done that, I showed them their own guidance. I'll get this up. So we have legal and policy contradictions. We've got UC's own policy, AZM H305 and H3021. Housing elements must reflect actual occupancy needs. So you shouldn't be getting blocked from accommodation or like housing applications through this really. AZM H3174. A child can be treated as having two homes if in their best interests. There's also legal breaches. The Children Act of 1989, sections 1 and 11, which I explained in my previous video. To recap, child needs are paramount and both parents presumed involved. There is also a human rights violation in my case at the moment, but generally in everyone's case, which is Article 8, the right to respect of privacy and family life. Policy unfairly penalises parents in this circumstance by basically charging them to parent by not actually considering their children's rights and needs. There's also UC regulations of 2013, Regulation 38, requires reporting of changes. So when I gave my court order then, initially they said they couldn't have it on the system, so I've had to get my co-parents' consent for them to have that. So if I'm obliged by UC agreements to update my circumstances should there be a change in circumstances, which there was by the fact that I now am in a 50-50 legally binding shared custody agreement. I lives with order. They haven't really known what to do with that because I don't want to impact me co-parents' financial stability at all. So by blocking a children's right to housing because they're trying to have a pop at me, they're not quite realising that they're breaking that law. So I'm currently pushing for proceedings which will hopefully help others. The Welfare Reform Act of 2012, UC structure was intended to reflect real-time changes. So why aren't they? Why are social workers telling me that their policy is also UC policy is also the first wall they hit when trying to support people into housing? So they hit the same brick wall we do. The Social Security Administration Act of 1992. Universal Credit has a statutory duty to administer benefits fairly and consistently. Now again, I'm not asking for any money. I'm just asking them to stop charging me bedroom tax. You're not going to start charging single mums bedroom tax for their children's bedroom, so can you quite politely pack it in? And the Data Protection Act, GDPR, they've processed inaccurate personal data because they tried to actually make a change to my claim to remove the kids from it, despite the fact my legal circumstances is that I am a single parent with kids. I will leave that list in the description if anyone's currently in that same stage of the battle. So what can you do right now? If you're in this loop, losing sleep, blaming yourself, thinking there's something wrong with you, stop. There isn't. Start treating your experience like a case file. Save everything. Screenshot every message. Request everything in writing. And when professionals contradict each other, point it out, but don't have it as the hill you're dying on. Document it. A way of getting this information, if you're already so far in, is to do a subject access request. I had to do this with a couple of agents like school, council, and that basically gives every interaction between you. It forces them to have to collate it, but it means you get it. This channel isn't just about exposing the system, it's about surviving it long enough to beat it. Here are a few tips to help me hold the line. So step one is to back everything up in case you lose it. So you want to file for housing, for court, one for UC, one for social services, and just any agencies you're contacting at this point in time. Even just have a file for the contradictions. Label everything by date. This turns chaos into evidence. Step two is you want an email address for this. So it's not all getting cluttered, it's not all getting jumbled. It's easy to find the things that you're looking for. It's also worth pointing out that there are parenting apps so you can communicate with your co-parents in a way that the court can check. The apps such as Talking Parents or Our Family Wizard, you can't delete any messages on it, so you can't give her shit, she can't give you it, and then it gets deleted. Like, because the problem you've got when it comes to screenshots is that they can be doctored, so sometimes the court can be a little bit iffy about it unless it suits their narrative. So, a parenting app is a safe way of doing this. Don't bother arguing on the phone. Like, it's tempting. If you end up doing it, don't beat yourself up. As long as it's not to your bloody ex, like, otherwise you just crumbled your case. But keep everything in writing. If someone tries to call you to talk it through, politely ask them to put it in an email. If they refuse, log it. But that is if you've actually reached that point where it's abundantly clear they're not going to help you, where it's you against them. At that point, you want to be holding them to account and making them justify themselves, which you're going to struggle to do if it's been a verbal conversation trying to prove that they've said it. Mainly eat, sleep, and grounding. So you're not gonna put very high quality thought into this if your brain's running on fumes. So eat, sleep, hydrate, bathe. In this case, it's not just self care, it's also strategy. So it's wise to prioritize what will create a change. So just pick one battle at a time and stick to it. If you're doing course, don't try and win housing and UC at the same time. If you can, brilliant, but it's just unlikely and you're just going to burn yourself out. Stack the wins, brick by brick, and remember you didn't fail. You were dropped into a system that's been failing families, especially dads, for decades. That's not on you. So keep in mind, the more you understand it, the more dangerous you become to it. If you've made it this far, then thank you so much, and I hope this is helping and guiding. Stay with the series, and remember, the system isn't broken, it just isn't built for you. But we're going to unbuild it, brick by brick, and tear this entire system of abuse to the ground. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.